What are your earliest memories of Walter Cronkite?
My earliest memories, I think, are of the 1960s, the Kennedy years. I remember when CBS went from a 15-minute to a 30-minute news program. We discussed it in my house. I remember he did an interview with President Kennedy. And then, of course, I remember his gripping commentary when the president was killed. We kept the television on to Walter Cronkite the whole time. We wanted to see what he had to say.
Walter knew 12 presidents. Some of them he said pretty well. He reportedly even traded off-color jokes with President Reagan. What was your relationship with him like?
Well, it was good. I got to know him after I became president because we both spent some time in the summer in Martha's Vineyard. And we started going to a number of parties together. And then in 1998, when I was there, not long before the midterm elections, which came out very well for us, and at a time when we were concerned about the African embassy bombings, and I was looking for opportunities to strike back at Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, he called me one day and invited Hillary and Chelsea and me to go sailing with him and with Betsy, and we had the most wonderful day. It was a kind and generous thing to do, and we went out together, and he was then, I think, 81, and already he was still a great sailor, and we had a great day out there. And then after I left the White House and I got on the speaking circuit, I just fortuitously ran into him quite frequently. So I saw him at various public events and on Martha's Vineyard for several years after that, and we really struck up a friendship. I love to get him to talk about what he did as a young man in journalism, starting out in Houston, and what happened in those early years. And I came to admire him even more after I got to know him than I did just as a presence on television. He was what he seemed to be. He was a kind, caring man with a razor-sharp mind and an unquenchable desire to know things. And he had a very high standard. When he said something, he believed it to be true.
Some people say, President Clinton, that presidents feared Walter Cronkite because if he was critical of a policy, he could make things very difficult. I know he wasn't in the anchor chair during your administration, but did you fear him at all?
I didn't fear him, but I wanted to know what he thought. And when I was president, of course, he did those science programs for a while after he left CBS, and then he did a number of other public forums where I thought what he was trying to do really was to inspire the values and the practices that he embraced in other journalists and also in the larger public discourse. So when he wrote something about freedom of speech or the necessity to open government documents or the necessity to come clean about a certain policy or something like that, whenever he wrote something, I read it very, very carefully because I trusted him, and I thought if he was advocating a certain course of action, it deserved to be taken seriously. I suppose if he'd still been the anchor, I would have been in mortal terror every night, but I never feared him. I considered him a friend, but I always admired and respected him, and I wanted to know what he thought.
Walter Cronkite famously prodded Anwar Sadat to visit Israel for peace talks with Menachem Begin. William Safire called it Cronkite diplomacy. Do you think in some ways, President Clinton, he was even more influential than the commander-in-chief?
Well, I think that in that particular case, if he gave advice like that, since there was no personal or political gain to him, he might have been heard more. Anwar Sadat was a very savvy man. He understood how America worked. He understood that Cronkite had the pulse of America. And he understood that if he did that, if he took the risks for peace of going to Israel, speaking to the Knesset, even if he gave a very tough speech, which he did do, that he would have it well reported in America and that he had a real chance to prevail. I think that what very often happens when a person like Sadat wants to take a risk for peace, you know it might not work, you know there are no guarantees, you just don't want to be made a fool of. And I think when Walter Cronkite urged him to do that, he knew that whatever happened, he would wind up with more respect in the United States and in the world generally. Walter had that kind of influence. He could give you that kind of guarantee without ever making it explicit.
What are the qualities that stand out to you personally that made Walter Cronkite such a venerated American, such an icon?
First, I think people could identify with him. He seemed accessible and open. He seemed totally trustworthy, but he was very intelligent, and he had a real desire to know things. And we all got that, all of us who were just watching him. We knew that if he said something, he had researched it, he was confident in his facts, and you never thought he was trying to spin you. We talk a lot in American politics now about the storyline and how when a storyline gets embedded, it's hard to change, even if it's inconsistent with the facts. You never had the feeling that there was a storyline with Walter Cronkite, that he just looked at the facts, did his best to find out what was going on, and then told them to you. It made him incredibly trusted, and that's a very valuable commodity because all of us need someone else to go find out a set of facts necessary to be good citizens that we don't have time to find out. He did that for us, and he did it in a way that I think no one has since. He was amazingly gifted at it.
Do you think you've ever seen someone celebrated and remembered with such respect and reverence?
Not in the media, really. And I say that not because there aren't other media people worthy of respect, even reverence, but I think that it's important. He came into television news when it was young, when the networks were only doing 15-minute programs. Then you went to the 30-minute programs. It was a momentous time in America in the 60s and 70s, lots of things going on, lots of real raw news to report. There were only 3 networks, enough to have competition and keep each other honest, but few enough so that everybody could get market share and could afford to staff out these news departments with seasoned reporters and investigators. The whole thing had a certain vibrancy but stability that Cronkite came to embody. So he was a uniquely gifted and I think a very good man, but he also came of age at a time when all of his strengths could flower. And it was a good thing for America, and I think a good thing for journalism. I think he made a lot of young people want to be journalists. I know when I was 22, I had a brief period of disillusionment with the thought of a life in public service, and the only other thing I thought about doing then was going into journalism. He was a big reason why. I just thought he was great.
And who knows, you might have my job if you had made that decision.
I doubt it. I doubt it.
President Clinton, thank you so much for talking with us and sharing your memories of Walter Cronkite tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. As I said, he was a great citizen, but he was also a profoundly good man. I don't think we should lose sight of that. All those professional gifts emanated from a very good core. And that's something that's beyond training. It's just who he was.
Very well said. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.